All right, so three things I want to talk about here with the aftermath of World War One. One was the Treaty of Versailles. Two, how Europe was shaped afterward, all the new nations that were created. And three, of course, the League of Nations. Okay, so the world was left in turmoil, needless to say, by World War One. Whole countries' economies had gone down the drain because of this war. You could see Great Britain, as for example, was one of the greatest lenders and then became one of the biggest debtors in the world after the war. But okay, the economies of Europe would eventually recover, maybe sooner than expected. We have, after World War One, we have what is called the Roaring Twenties, with the advent of the electrical devices such as the radio and the vacuum cleaner. Many of and things such as nightclubs and many different inventions would come about, and consumerism would come about, and so maybe the economies recovered a little bit faster from this war than expected in an age of what's called the Roaring Twenties. But okay, there were still many lasting effects, negative effects that you could see from the war. For example, the amount of countries that would be left in turmoil. Here we can see a map of the different countries that were created after the war. What happened was Germany had won a lot of territory from Russia after Russia had resigned, right? It was part of the treaty that we talked about in the last section. So all of that territory in the east, that's the reason why they became new countries, because they were owned by Germany, originally owned by Russia, and a long time ago, originally free nations, you could say, such as Poland was divided up between Germany and Russia, you can see over here, for over 100 years, is what the book says. So, and as well as the Austro-Hungarian Empire was dissolved and made into many new nations, right? Austria-Hungary became separate nations again. Romania gained a lot of territory, and Yugoslavia was created to try and give the Serbs, the Slavic people, that nation state that they all wanted. The problem is that nationalism didn't really work. Trying to have one ethnic group have its own nation created a lot of problems, because no matter what, your nation is always going to have minorities, different ethnic groups living in that area. So probably the division of Europe and the creation of all these new nations would cause many wars that we don't hear about after World War One for the time to come. But okay, so the Treaty of Versailles is what divided up Europe. Let's talk about that now. The Treaty of Versailles, by many accounts, was a very harsh treaty. But I heard one interesting account where it says that the Treaty of Versailles was actually a very normal treaty for, if you look at the past treaties. Normally people wanted the losing country, to pay for the war, to pay reparations. So although you can see it as the nations were angry and they wanted to get back at Germany, maybe, yes, but also it is not the harshest of treaties when compared to others before it. But okay, the problem with it was that we had never seen a nation, we had never seen nations rocked so disastrously by a war before it. So the amount of money was incredible. Having to pay for this war above all others was the real problem. And we go back in the beginning where it talks about conflicting goals. You see that Britain wanted to increase its empire, create a Great Britain that would again dominate the world. But it wouldn't be so. Actually, in 1921, this is when Ireland gains its freedom from England, and that's not shown here in the map. So that was another war that came about after World War I. France wanted to make sure that Germany could never be a threat to them again. So Germany was supposed to have a limit on the size that their military could be. But a big factor to this war was sort of the end of imperialism, you could say. Although Britain and France kind of swept up the remaining territories and colonies from the other empires that they would lose, this would kind of be the beginning and the end for colonies, as the many nations would sue for independence. Many of those nations that fought in the British Empire would gain a sense of patriotism after fighting in that war, and they would gain more political scope in the British Empire. Okay, and one empire that we didn't talk about was the Ottoman Empire, which lost a huge amount of territory as a result in the Middle East. And this is actually where Britain and France kind of gain a large footing in the Middle East, and as well as where Israel is first declared, where is modern day Palestine. Where was Palestine? All right, so the last thing that was created was the League of Nations, and this was kind of back then the first UN, United Nations, that the US would actually not take part of because many people in the Congress of the US wanted to have the ability to remain neutral, to stay out of world conflicts, right? They didn't want to have to get dragged into every war. Whereas Wilson, on the other hand, he believed that being part of this League of Nations would help to foster peace and keep people discussing before fighting. However, the US would not be part of this League of Nations, and it was definitely weakened for it. So, the very lasting effects of the Civil War you could see is the ushering in of what is our modern age, right? The beginning of the 19th century, and the world would look starkly different from before this war to after the war. And as you can see in the preview here, it would also lead to many, many more revolutions.